What is good, YouTube? I have been gone for such a long time, and I apologize. If you haven't followed very well, I'm getting I'm finished with the course study already. I'm getting my insurance license to make probably the fifth or sixth career change in probably about 3 or 4 years. Um, so I've been missing some time. I had to actually take some time off to make sure I was studying, make sure I'm following through. My exams actually started even until October 2nd. Um, so I still have a good bit of studying to do to make sure I'm not going to miss out on that exam and waste my money on the examination fees. So that's a shorter explanation of why I've been missing so much time. The longer one would be, for those who aren't aware, my wife is pregnant. She's going to be entering her third trimester very soon. So a lot of things with that too, hospital visits, also tied into also having to leave to do wedding for a weekend, and then you tie in the fact that I'm also the commissioner of a fantasy football league. That we've been doing very, very, very interactive things like group sit downs and streaming together. And it was a step up from what we were wanting to do with this league. It's a tight knit group of guys, so we got some good things going. And so I guess I was kind of enjoying life, kind of avoiding the politics aspect. Um, I will say thank you for everyone for being here. I do apologize for leaving you hanging for so long, especially when I was picking and ramping things back up there. Um, well, let's just say this has probably been one of those periods, not recently in the last couple of days, but probably for the last couple of weeks. There was a lot of days where I just didn't even get on Twitter, didn't even get on X, wasn't paying attention to the news, and I felt like it was a good thing. The unfortunate aspect of that is, you end up missing so much, you end up falling out of the news cycle, and it feels like there's just so much that you have to go back in and catch up with. But thank you very much. Yeah, I do appreciate it. I made that new logo, and then I didn't actually get to what's the word? Flesh it out or show it exposition until recently, until today. So the overall theme is going to be a bit more of a simple one, but one that I think is one that people avoid to go to. And if you read the title, that is good versus evil. Many people refuse to look at the current political split that we have right now as such. And I think at this point, there's very few ways that you can look at it without going to that extreme, which is we were fighting. It is a battle of good versus evil. The unfortunate thing is the fact that it seems to be good is in the minority. And that's not to say everything on the right is good and everything on the left is bad. There's obviously differences in between there. And we'll make more sense of this as we get along in this. So I do want to say, welcome back. This is another episode of Offensively Accurate. Your host, Atlas Thugged, aka White Boy Deep Voice. Any way that you find me, whichever moniker you might find me on X, TikTok, Instagram, all of those things. So get that covered. I do want to also point out too, I did still continue my appearances on the Jar Openers podcast. So if you missed any of those, I do highly encourage you to go there. That's hosted not only on my page, but on Atlas or America First TV. That's a change from what Worrell's original handle was. His channel's been blowing up, and then I'm even surprised he even got that handle on YouTube, for one. But he has rebranded, and that is where we are doing our Saturday show for the Jar Openers podcast, and that is on Saturdays from 8 to 10 p.m. So go back and catch those if you missed those. And I will still continue to make appearances on that podcast for the near future. And with that, we may be actually adding a third co-host there, or maybe someone who's maybe just more of a recurring guest to bring on. I'm not entirely familiar with who she is, and it is a woman. She runs a channel called Bring the Asteroid or Bring the Meteor News. I've yet to get an actual good deep dive of where she's at. The other thing I do want to say is forgive the uncanny appearance too. The AC in my apartment is broken. I'm actually struggling for air as we talk right now. It's pretty aggressively hot in here. So that may also limit how far I can go before I pass out from heat exhaustion. And so, well, a couple other things. One thing I do want to make note of is until I actually get a little bit settled down with the new job, I may only be able to do once a week streams instead of doing bi-weekly, how I was picking up to. I actually was doing like 3 sometimes a week. And let's move on to the news though. Vice presidential debate is actually sometime, I believe next week. I think it's not getting much news coverage because it's too limp-wrist going against each other, right? I don't think JD Vance is someone who's very, very popular on the even on the internal side of the right wing, let alone Tim Walz is just a goof. It's a goofball. That's probably the lightest way I can put it. People even get mad when I use the word Fruit Loop, but I think that would actually apply very, very, very accurately to Tim Walz. He's a Fruit Loop. He's someone who has a lot of weird kind of female effeminate tendencies behaviorally, and not only just in his language, but the way his body mannerisms. But everyone, make sure that you have that in mind too. I'm curious how that one will play out. Especially for someone who's not a good fan, or a big fan, I should say, of JD Vance. I kind of follow line with a lot of the others there. And let's just look at it from topographical here, what we have for the news for today. And that is that World War III is once again moving further along in the escalation, if you will. You now have these recent assassination attempts on Donald Trump being attributed to Iran, or that it would be Iranian proxies, or it is from some Iranian influence. In short, I just, are we doing this again? Are we going to believe these Middle Eastern? And one of the first things I would like to say about this Iran thing is what do they get out of it? It being already so openly and apparent that everyone's already looking to Iran, because that's what the mainstream news keeps pushing. I find it to just be, I don't want to be mean, but I think that you are extremely misled. I'm gonna just be honest. I think you're dumb if you believe that Iran is behind all of this stuff. If you can't see it for what it is, or at least in my opinion, this is once again a rising up of, let's go get them sand people one more time. This echoes what happened during the Bush era with WMDs. And I think one of the things I will say that I find extremely reprehensible is the utter quickness. A lot of the top end Republicans and in the media space, even if they're independents, so willingly ready to be like, all right, let's go get them. This willingness to go to war it disgusts me for a multitude of reasons. One of them being the fact that I don't believe it's Iran at all. I think this is kind of the scapegoat being used to, again, continually to churn the military industrial complex. But with that, let's even walk it back a little bit further. Now, I didn't go as hard as I wanted to about the pager incident with Israel and the strikes that are happening in Lebanon, because, the jar openers is a bit safer space, I should say, and that's not to take anything away from Moral or America First TV, but I do have a lot harsher opinions that I generally kind of hold back while I'm on there. And that's just to say truly that I find this to be, once again, a direct correlation to Israel, and what people deem it to be as our greatest ally. Now, to make sense of this too, I got a recent report, which I wish I would have had bookmarked, but I did hear this directly word of mouth from Nick Fuentes just recently before I came on here, is that the civilian casualty count is the overwhelming majority of who was actually killed between the pagers, the walkie-talkies, the 57 airstrikes, and I believe there was another strike that occurred later on after the fact. So massively, or the majority of them were civilians. I believe the count is over it's like 50 some children and over 90 women. It's just, people will hold the isolationist point, until it threatens something along the lines of they tried to get Trump. Now, one thing that kind of made me a little bit sad was I was listening to somebody who I used to respect very highly and very greatly, and this would be Tim Pool. Now, Tim Pool runs a show that he has a decently milquetoast fence sitter kind of position on everything, but he is notoriously known to be anti-war, even though he points to civil war all the time. He just points to the fact of how realistic and probable that is. Now, on international conflicts, I view his opinions to be less relevant because I find him to just come from a place that is a secular standpoint. But he's generally very, very anti-war. But that's not enough, apparently, in this case, right? And so this is the same guy, the same group of people who sit here and go, hey, the mainstream media lies to you all the time. The mainstream media has an agenda, and then all of a sudden, all mainstream outlets go, hey, man, Iran was behind it. And then everyone, all of a sudden, that it goes out everybody's brain, and we're like, oh, yeah, no, it was Iran, dude. Did you see the article from CNN? It's Iran doing it. And I'm saying this as somebody who is probably well within the frame of being drafted for someone who probably has a decent chance of being someone selected if things were to escalate well beyond just a military mission in Israel, and not Israel, but in the Middle East, I should say. And that's looking at some of these numbers here. Now, you look at Lebanon reporting that the fact that the majority of these casualties were civilians. And this goes back once again to what I said earlier, which is the pager strike. I don't understand how people went the James Bond route. They went the route of, oh my gosh, like look how clever this was. Wow. Look how wow, this is kind of cool. Like and I don't, when you look at some of the facts behind it, which we pointed out on the Jar Openers podcast, which is they put this plan in place for 15 years. I mean, they Israeli intelligence officers made sure to meticulously put forward and build these shell companies to, for one bombing instance, that level of effort, only to, in the end, indiscriminately set off those bombs with delays on them in the attempt to get the highest rate of damage they could. Now, you can sit there and say you don't believe what Lebanon says, but at a certain point, you have to pick which side of the propaganda you lean on. And for someone who's been burned too many times from the United States, I fail to sit there and believe a word of anything that mainstream media pushes. Now, this is something I actually pointed out directly right after the VP nomination in the RNC about JD Vance. And that particular thing is the moment he gets the nomination, he goes and sits down, and I can't remember who it was with. He goes, well, we got to make sure we strike Iran hard and fast. And it was like, what? Now, the RNC was actually directly, I think it was like a day, 2-3 days, maybe even after. It might have been actually the day after when Trump made his appearance of the original assassination attempt. And that Iran did it, quickly was retracted and then kind of like fell out of the news cycle. But it seems that the second attempt, even though there's all of these absurd kind of Ukrainian connections with this shooter and him he's trying to recruit Afghans for like $1,200 a month to go fight for Ukraine. Again, a lot of these things just don't make sense. None of them kind of correlate in my opinion. But it goes to say that at the drop of a hat, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle anymore. I think both sides of the aisle are pro-war, depending on who they can get to blame for the reason why they go for war. Now, and I will say once again, this reeks of, oh, look at these sand people. Look at they're doing these animals, these savages. And I have to say, for someone who listened to a 4-hour interview with Ian Carroll, who is someone who's doing an extravagant amount of information, kind of deep dives and research into what's going on. And I've covered Ian Carroll on this channel many times before. This is somebody who was well ahead of the GameStop, I always mess that up. The GameStop stonks with the market manipulation. This is somebody who is pointing out the issues with the Las Vegas shooting. This is somebody who has put in a bunch of time in a bunch of different areas. Specifically, he's kind of like a conspiracy rabbit hole kind of diver. Now, there are some that he's kind of pointed to and it's like, hey, some of this doesn't make sense. You shouldn't listen to this one. Like this one's too far out of purview of reality. But I will say, he is someone who, even though he might be a Washington state liberal, he has covered a lot of this extremely objectively. Now, the further you look into a lot of this stuff, and the further that I look into this stuff, I can really only come to one conclusion with the preponderance of evidence, which is the fact that Israel is the aggressor in this situation. And for someone that is our greatest ally, which we kind of don't really have a defense treaty with, we kind of have an entire alignment treaty with, which is we are expected to back them at literally anything or any cost, is a recipe for disaster, especially when you look at just how openly with these pagers were set off as explosives in markets, at gas stations, on the street, at 3:30 p.m. during a rush hour period of time. And then you look at what the Lebanon numbers are reporting and say you didn't even believe any of that. We can at least see that they did detonate these pagers with explosives in the walkie-talkies, with knowing that it would cause collateral damage. Now, this is a far cry from how the United States carries out its operations for the most part, especially when you look at how we do with spec ops, how we do hostage negotiations, and that stems just even from policing and all the way up to the military. Now, one of the code items in the military, though, is that we actually don't negotiate with terrorists, and this is for a very specific reason. This is to actually ward off terrorists from wanting to take Americans hostage, because if they know that you will pay out a certain amount of money per American hostages you have, you would actually kind of financially incentivize these things to happen. So we kind of have a take different from like the European nations like France and Germany, who have a specific number they'll pay out to international terrorists and for hostage situations. But what is this? Where does this lead us? Right. So if Israel, and as AF Post had reported, and I apologize, I haven't put anything on screen yet. I do have quite a bit of things we can we'll go through here later on. I just wanted to cover this as my open opinion here. I can't stand behind that. I can't stand behind a 15-year plan that ended up in a bunch of civilian casualty death. I think it is terrorism. I think that the United States at this point needs to begin to distance itself from Israel. But I'm not seeing much of that anywhere. And, we can go into the deep details of a lot of the reasons why this is. Now, you can point to a lot of things like dispensationalism, which carries on the Christianity alliance, which is, they fail to understand that this new state of Israel is not what has been there always, and is not what the original creation led it to be. It is actually an enforced kind of built-up artificial state purchased by the Rothschilds, I believe, back in the 60s. Or I guess not purchased, but rather given to for a sum of money, I believe, by the British Empire at that point. All this to say, essentially, though, where does this lead us, right? If AF Post is reporting that these tactics are being done in an attempt to de-escalate through escalation, right? I mean, it's nonsensical. They can essentially at this point kind of say anything. Israel can kind of literally say whatever they want. And when you look at the fact that your Congress and your legislative body we'll just look at the Senate, for an example. The Senate is the wild one. I believe it is 92 per all of the 92 of 100 of the Senate members currently were paid by AIPAC, which is their foreign entity that does lobbying here in America. And then you look at 6 others who were already pro-Zionist, who didn't need the AIPAC funding because they already leaned that way. It's a pretty kind of insane ratio for those who have not been financially benefited by the Israel foreign lobby for a lot of these things. I am going to slowly begin to take the guardrails off. Here in the coming episodes, I'm going to go a lot deeper into things that particularly relate to the Christian and Jewish kind of dichotomy, which is not a dichotomy, but if you were to put them in a vacuum in the way that these things kind of relate to each other outside of Islam. Because I think it's imperative for people to hear. I think it's imperative that people kind of shake free of this kind of idea that they are our greatest ally, especially when you look at the things that they kind of drag us into, especially when you look into things like JFK. I mean, JFK is literally quoted, and this is in relation to them stealing tactical nuke, or I think it would have been tactical nuke. It would have been regular nuclear armaments they stole from the United States, as well as control codes and things of that nature, when JFK was president. And I mean, in quote, you can find this. JFK says, quote, and forgive the language, but this is JFK. He says, quote, "These motherfuckers lied to me all the time," end quote. And this is in relation to the fact that after they had realized that Israel had stolen these nuclear assets and then were asked to then inspect them, Israel took these officials, which I believe also JFK was involved in this, to a fake control room, into a fake control room meant to, again, obfuscate the actual full reach of nuclear power that they now had possessed. So there's just so many rabbit holes that you can go down to, and it's one of these ones that has ties to, I mean, just think about it on a surface level, right? Anything, you say this about a Mexican, oh, that's racist. You say this about a black person, oh, that's racist. You say this about a Chinese person, oh, that's racist. Well, for some reason, Jewish people have like their little own term that they get to actually bend and mold depending on what's being said, which is anti-Semitism, right? And so anything that you might say that's relevant to the Holocaust, Jewish people, Israel, the stance of Israel, the posterity of Israel, they call you an anti-Semite, and then boom, next thing you know, you might as well be wearing, a swastika on your left arm and shave your mustache down. And that's just the unfortunate reality of it. And so, the longer that I have been doing this, the more I've actually begun to realize and seen that there's a large portion of conservative pundits at the top of mainstream media that already sit there and go, this and this black people, this and this about immigrants. Come on, man. This and this about, these Hispanics, like this and this about gays, and this and this about trans people. And then there seems to always be this missing category. There seems to always be this inability, or rather, unwillingness to talk about one specific group of people. Now, I know this may make a lot of people uncomfortable, but I wouldn't name the show offensively accurate if I didn't fully intend to actually engage and deep dive on things I find to be truthful and significant to talk about to actually better shape your worldview. Now, the reason why this is also called good versus evil is because one of the main themes that we'll get into here in a little bit is the fact that Alex Jones has now been forced by a judge. I believe it was a judge who came down with this commandment. We'll get into it a little bit. Being forced to sell InfoWars, forced to actually auction it off to the highest bidder. Now, there is positive light here, and we'll get into it here in a second. But one of the things was the fact that Roger Stone, I think, has actually thrown his name into the ring, says he's going to try to gather a group of financial wealthy individuals to group buy it and then make Alex Jones the CEO. So essentially give him his company back, but not him owning it anymore. And then some other people have actually pointed out too the fact that, Elon Musk has like the coolest opportunity to do something right here, which would be him obviously buying InfoWars. And then I would imagine once again in that scenario, installing Alex Jones as the CEO or some other kind of position that would be allowed. So we're going to get into this. I just wanted to go ahead and give that spiel here, especially because I've missed a lot of things, and I wanted to make sure my opinion and stance on what was going on over in the Middle East was well known. Especially because it's one of those ones where you have to walk a specific line, and I'm not trying to do anything that threatens the existence of Worrell's channel, especially when like he's doing me a favor by being on there. And so understand that I'm not just going to start screaming and spewing off my anti, I guess really more so pro-Christian, anti-Jewish positions, especially when it comes to a lot more moral abiding guidelines in the way that these people carry themselves. So we will start with some actual smaller stuff here. Actually, no, forgive me. I want to just go right to the Alex Jones thing because I think it's pretty important here. Let me go ahead and go to the back end here, and I'll go ahead and pull it on screen here in just a second. I'll throw my headphones in to make sure I'm not blowing anybody out of the water. So this is from Leading Report. Breaking. Judge orders the sale of Alex Jones InfoWars to pay Sandy Hook families. And I go ahead and put it on screen here. I go ahead and zoom it in too. Make it a lot easier to see. This is from Leading Report. Now, again, you have Dominic Michael Trippi saying, unfortunately, this is true. Judge orders the sale of Alex Jones InfoWars in a precedent-setting case against the freedom of speech. Forgive me. Operations to wind down over the next few months. Now, I believe I did see earlier that there is an actual timeline that was given to this, specifically kind of saying it has to be done within the month, or I think actually before November. And well, why would that be important? Well, that would be important for one specific reason, which is obviously that is at the height of when people are getting their information on the election. That's when everything kind of begins to rise and escalate once again, in terms of having powerful information closer to the time of the election. This is their way of essentially knocking one of them out, one of the big ones who are fighting against this globalist operation. And you can even call it that if you want, but this evil rap of elite individuals who are trying their hardest to push things such as, just kind of direct Satanist kind of principles, things of indifference, and so on and so forth. And we're familiar with all the different ways that kind of exhibits itself in different news stories. Now, Clint Russell's reaction is extremely accurate. I feel the exact same way here. And he was responding to Disclosed TV, which had also pointed out that, again, and they're more specific here, for InfoWars to be liquidated and auctioned off in November. With U.S. bankruptcy judge Christopher Lopez stating he will approve the auctions. And so I would imagine, just before we get to Clint Russell's take, that this Christopher Lopez is probably someone who's also just as ideologically bent as every other judge involved in this case. And if he's not, I'm sure they'll find a way to get one in there who is. Or maybe they'll just threaten him, who knows. So I doubt that they will allow the sale of his company to someone like Roger Stone or to someone like Elon Musk. I'm sure they will ensure that they find it to be sold to somebody who will either destroy it completely and liquidate it completely, or use it to attack the right from the left. And now Clint Russell says here, and make this a bit bigger too. I'm surprised I actually zoomed in a little bit. I don't know why it's so bad. Okay, Clint Russell saying, if they were interested in compensating the Sandy Hook families, they would allow Alex to just pay a percentage of InfoWars' annual revenue. By liquidating everything, they killed the golden goose. Needless to say, they are doing this because it was never about Sandy Hook. It was always about silencing Alex. And one of these kind of crazy things with this, and I kind of had a blast. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this so I can see all the bars here. One of the things that kind of like took me away, and I'll be honest here, is, I talk about the news with my friends all the time. Never truly as in depth as I would ever get here on Offensively Accurate. Never really kind of on the same wavelength as I would get with normally everyone who comes here and watches, because everybody in my audience is kind of on the same wavelength. I had a couple friends who were like, yeah, Alex Jones is really good until he went off the deep end. And I kind of I was like, wait a minute, like what? I was like, off the deep end, like what? I kind of questioned that. And then I never got an answer of what this deep end was. Now I can only assume that this deep end that they were referring to was the Sandy Hook incident, which was where I believe, and I could be entirely wrong on this, but the alleged allegation is that Alex Jones defamed these individuals from Sandy Hook because he said that there might have been a presence of crisis actors here. And he even got called out by a lot of people who exist on the right for saying these things, or that it was too far, or that there wasn't enough evidence to actually contribute that realistically. Either way, I don't understand how you can kind of defame a unknown family or individual people like that. I guess that's one of the things that I didn't really understand. It's like, what kind of financial damages was he causing? What kind of like finite financial damages was he causing? And Abigail saying, is he able to start a whole new company? Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that they'll try to do everything they can to prevent him from doing so. Now, by which means that may come about, I'm unsure, but I can see them doing whatever they can to not do it. And this is something that people pointed out a lot, which is the fact that Alex Jones is somebody who would literally shirtless with just wearing a pair of his underwear would go into the street with a tripod and a phone, and he would keep doing what he's always been doing. That's just the way that he is. That's the kind of a person that he has become. He's just very, very full on against this fight. And he deems it globalism. I deem it just a battle against evil. So I don't think we have anything to worry about there. And maybe he just has to relegate everything back to his X account. And so hopefully that plays out to the best of what we can. It's just going to be the fact of all of his financial value that he's built up with InfoWars. I believe that involves the supplement companies. All of that means that now he will lose like the copyright and trademark positioning on these things. So he'll have to start brand new on a lot of different aspects. So I'm sure it will damage him in some form. That may just end up being time, right? I don't think he's going to have an unwillingness to continually doing what he's doing. And I did want to make note of the Roger Stone take here. This is the correct scene here. So Roger Stone, once, like I said earlier, he says he's putting a group together to buy InfoWars and hire Alex Jones to run it. And he's just quoting here Mario Nafal. Because again, if you're unfamiliar, the federal judge, I believe the defamatory charges were around 1.2 billion. It may have been even more than that. And a lot of people pointed out, these are greater figures than the GDP of France, let alone other countries like that. Speech is already no longer free. That is very true. X is the only singular place that you can come to even attempt to have free speech. And that's the reason why I use this platform so much. So again, 1 million views and you have, 37,000 likes. A lot of people are ensuring that this would be a thing that happens. Now, again, I will say I have very little faith in the fact that the judges or anybody involved in this case will approve of that sale of auction. But maybe Roger Stone has a trick up his sleeve. Maybe he'll purchase it under some kind of shell company of his own. Who knows, though? I just wanted to point this to really go at what Clint Russell said, which is, this is more about silencing Alex. Has very, very, very little to do about the actual, refinancing of these Sandy Hook families who, I feel for their losses, if they are the families who lost their children. But to say that they suffered financial damages in the amount of $1.2 billion is just like, I mean, you have to be retarded to believe that. I mean, make that make sense. It's just not real. It was clearly an attempt to, not even a big ask, but it was to just make something so insurmountable, so unable to recover from, that it would simply have to force him into bankruptcy and having to liquidate all of these assets that have some value, because they'd have to market to that rate. But to move on from the Alex Jones issue, I've not seen many updates with this, but I'm not sure if it's being covered by the mainstream that much, as it did break only around the last 24 hours. And I will start from the top here as we get into a bit more of these stronger things. We're going to go to actually Sean Strickland here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull some of these away here and make sure that the sound is going to be okay before I play this. Pull it down a little bit, actually, and make sure my volume is fine. And so this commenter on this tweet says, Weimar conditions need what? Is he wrong? Now, I simply titled this, Sean Strickland pushing what every man is too afraid to say, but definitely thinks. And then in parentheses I said, unless he's a liberal, then he's technically a woman. Now, it's a 2-minute clip. This is a sharp tangent from what we just covered on Alex Jones. But again, the overall nature here is we're fighting in a from the minority position of good, at least what I believe, and I hope I'm in the right position. That's not even a hope. I know I'm in the right position. That's why the persecution comes the way that it does, against a majority evil. Now, this is just another tangent of that, but it falls in the same frame of, let me actually just say it like this. And I made this point to my wife the other day. Any opportunity, any chance, any time where you are faced with, I could say this, but I don't want to upset anybody. I could say this, but I don't want to bother anybody. Well, understand then in that moment, then, rather than fearing God, you chose to fear whatever this evil circular mind logic is of the wokeness, the evil virus, like that's what you chose to fear over God. Like you were in more of the fear of the repercussions of saying what you should have said than you were of God in that moment. And so once I actually begin to frame myself in this position all the time, I feel like a lot of times I might even be chewing a lot more off than what I can, or biting a lot more off than what I can chew. But I don't want to be in that position where the Lord asks me, why were you a coward? Why didn't you say that then? Why did you deny me then? Now, I know people know what I'm talking about, because you will get this feeling inside your soul, really, because someone across the room, or not really across the room, but maybe it's a coworker, and coworker's like, hey man, dude, yeah, like I just do this every single night, man. And like me and my gay friends, and we all go have this gay orgy, and we all go do this, and you just feel in your heart that you're just like, it's probably something you shouldn't be doing. But how often do you actually say that, right? How often do you actually bear and rebuke and be a witness for the right thing in those moments? Or do you always let it slide? Do you always just let it occur, and you're just like, I don't want to be fighting this person all day. Like, I'd rather just have peace of mind and convenience. And so you may not view it in the form of like a direct, like, oh, like I'm in pure fear of this thing. Like, my God could never beat that thing. But it's more so of, how many times do you think you're going to deny that when you had all these opportunities, especially when you are, go and make disciples of the nation, right? Why is there this seeming kind of bent, even from a lot of Christian churches, which is like, we just all want to get along, man. Well, I'll tell you what, man, getting along in those terms that are generally presented is not going to get a lot of people to the gates of heaven. And that's just a fact. Now, hate it or love it, you're in this position because a lot of the generations before you have all failed out, right? So many generations before you have entirely failed, man. I'm looking at this as someone who's about to have a daughter here soon. I'm so angry at some of these older generations for letting a lot of this stuff slide. Like now the fight could have been like a lot easier, right? If you guys would have taken it up, 20 years ago. But everybody lets it slide, and now it's like everyone's like, the apocalypse, the world's ending in 2 years, and it's like, really, dude? Now I got to take on an even more obscene kind of challenge to just ensure that like my daughter's not being manipulated and indoctrinated 6 ways from Sunday, from Taylor Swift to the education system to racial lines. And it's like, dude, where were any of the men? Like, I look up and I just like, I see all these dudes who are smoking cigarettes, like, yeah, I'm hard, dude. And it's like, yeah, you're hard in what form? In what way, dude? You kept your mouth shut for 40 years and now here we are. Now, I don't say that with any kind of vitriol because it's like, I think that these, I'm just saying, man, like, we got to this point because a lot of men before me said, not me, dude. I'd rather just get along, man. I'd rather just have a good time with my friends. Like, we don't need to talk about all that. Well, here we are, man. And now I'm forced in a position where it's like, getting along with these people almost ensures the demise of where I am. And that alone just things like, what things wokeism directly attacks, which is, a lot of things which would be the anti-white prerogative it has. But let's go to Sean Strickland once again, though. And this is going to be directly, specifically at one angle, and you'll understand very quickly. And again, if anything's wrong with the sound, let me know. I will adjust accordingly.
Yeah, a really solid fucking guy. Like Brazilians, man, they have like this old school, like America, you guys, we're all a bunch of degenerate fucks. Like I was talking to one guy, like I was joking about, growing up and my dad fucking snorting oxys off the table and my mom trying to bang somebody, And this foreigner comes up to me, he's a UFC guy. He's like, Sean, why would you disrespect yourself like that? I'm like, dude, do you know Americans? We are so royally fucked. Like, we have so much fucking degeneracy in our, like, who we are. I can't even pretend not to be a white trash motherfucker. I look in the mirror and I wear a suit and I just think all the bad shit I've done, all the bad shit I've seen. I'm like, what are you fucking doing, you loser? So forwarding to these fucking dirty Brazilians, it was nice, man. They have like a good community. They fucking barbecue. They hang out. It was some good wholesome shit, man. Americans, we need to go back to like taking women out of the workforce. And maybe that's where we fucked up, you guys. We let women vote. No offense. But let me I want to tell you guys something. Think about America prior to women voting. They try to ban alcohol. I don't even drink, but I'm not trying to ban alcohol. So what you did, man, you let these women come in the workforce. Now we make less money. You got kids raising themselves on fucking TikTok. We need to go back to like 1942, especially after, maybe 1958 after we fucked up the Germans. We need to put women back in the kitchen. We need to take only one man needs to be working. So I think as a collective man group, we need to elect somebody that's going to put women back in the kitchen, put one man working, raise the wages, and build a fucking wall.
Have you ever thought about going?
That's pretty much a extremely secular positioning take on these things. Now, I highlight this because the reason why I actually have a lot of issues with a lot of the current Christian iterations of things and the way that kind of Christian men hold themselves out is, men are looking to these kinds of individuals. This is why people like Sean Strickland get these rises to fame. So the reason why the Andrew Tates of the world get these rises to fame. And it's not because they're coming from this super secular position. Now people will listen to them. It's because what they're saying is all what we should have been pushing for and upholding as a Christian faith, as a Christian nation, and not letting it become this way. Now, you can actually point to a few different things here. Now, he obviously touched upon the women aspect too, which is one that I also agree with, although maybe not in the exact way that he was framing it, especially not the way all he's cussing nonstop. But he also points to the fact of the overwhelming degeneracy just as a whole. And this degeneracy as a whole is something that everyone can come to understand, right? Now, he was saying so from an intrapersonal perspective of where he looks at everything that he's done and he's like, I don't even look right in this suit. Now, a lot of this stems to not just how people feel about themselves, but I think most people have this external feeling about the world they exist in, right? I feel like most people at their workplace are like, yeah, I have, there's like these 3 trans people I work with and these other girls that I work with, they party and they do all this stuff every single night. And we kind of just we just continually put up with it. People don't put boundaries on things. And one of these in particular, this is one that we kind of hit off with Knights of Gideon, probably about 2 months ago now at this point, which would be like somebody like a Taylor Swift, someone who people refuse to come to the lines and say, yeah, man, a lot of what she pushes is directly, is pretty evil, man. The lifestyle she kind of lives and perpetuates to her audience, not even just being, entirely unattainable for a lot of average women, but also being like not holding of any virtues that we should be applauding. It's unfortunate because, I think there are many better men who could be out there speaking these kinds of truths, but are not. Now, for what reasons that holds them back, I don't know. I say I don't know, but I can give you a few ideas. Forgive me. A couple of these ideas would actually be, I don't know, maybe this kind of cultural Christianity that's formed itself into Jesus just said to be nice. This kind of gospel-centric only kind of teaching, evangelism. I speak a lot to how Christianity has been subverted. And we can even go to the position of, I'm sure if you didn't see it on your own because it was such a ridiculous thing, but Matt Walsh has covered this and many other people covered this, which is a woman at the pulpit, one, already an issue, but two, she goes so far as to say that Jesus would have walked her into the abortion clinic, and that if Jesus was here, he would have walked other women and held their hand while they terminated their pregnancies, right? So just going in these insane kind of tangents that are just directly antithetical to Christian teaching, right? Like we hold life as valuable, like life is precious from the moment it is conceived. Now, one of the schools of thought I have there is I can imagine this woman was just bothered by Christian teachings, maybe as she grew up. So she pursued this kind of position to make sure that she could, once installed as some kind of leader, speak the opposite to all the things, kind of her own interpretation of the word, and lean not on your own understanding, but that is what she was doing there. And a lot of it could just be stopped if we would have, I don't know, say Christian men just being like, hey, you shouldn't be leading. You shouldn't be in clergy. You shouldn't be the head of a church, the head of a body. Now, and it seems I always have to say these things with preambles, like that doesn't extend to women teaching other women, right? This is specifically about like a woman should not be in the headship of the church, let alone one that is essentially prescribing the direction and leadership of. And I go back to the fact of what I said earlier, which is where are all the men? Like, where are all the guys that I was supposed to look up to? Where are all the heroes that are supposed to be in the church? Where are all these men who are speaking out to the opposite of this? And they're not. They're actually they're rather being led by their own wives. And I think Ren of Men, who Will Spencer on X, now somebody who I've disagreed with here recently, but he said it best, right? This is the result, and we live in the era of men being afraid of their own wives and daughters. Now that just actually kind of touches on the feminist aspect, but I think it also speaks to a lot of the reasons why even men are as weak as they are. And so we've kind of built in this kind of odd pedestalizing, golden calving, if you will, of women in the modern day. And it's one of those things where if you go there, it's like, well, you got to walk on eggshells, man. You don't want to say anything. You want to say anything that would cross those political lines, and it's just, again, it's overall just disgusting weakness when it couldn't be any clearer, right? We go to 2 Timothy, right? And I like to even go to the actual original interpretation, which Paul's not saying, I do not permit women to speak. He literally says, I will not suffer a woman teaching, right? So he's literally not even saying like, I don't permit. That's like where the NIV and some of these ESV translations takes it. He literally says like, I will not, like that implies like it is a very bad thing, right? Like I will not suffer a woman teaching. You ask me, like it couldn't get any more black and white in the text, but for some reason we just avoid these things. We pretend like they don't have any meaning. We've allowed, the average church just to go in circles, covering the same like 10 stories year in and year out, and then never moving on to things like that would be actually beneficial to building upon a foundation of understanding, which a lot of it you can find going from like things like in the Old Testament. And, Tower of Babel is a common one I go to, right? And this speaks to the sovereignty of nations. This speaks to actually establishing borders and the way in which that these things should be upheld. Because now what we're currently experiencing is the average Christian, if you go and talk to them and you go, hey man, we should build a wall, no more immigrants. They go, wow, it's pretty unchristian of you to say that. Like or it's just love everybody, right? And it's just, again, it comes from this kind of extremely reductionist um, and subversion, I should say, of Christianity, right? It is taking a blanket idea and extrapolating that to all categories. And so it actually becomes a failure of categories. It becomes a failure of actual knowing when to apply these actual principles and understanding. And it goes back to like Dungeons and Dragons kind of rules. If you're familiar with what I'm about to say, right? This is the specific versus general. This is a specific rule will always supersede a general rule. And for people who aren't familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, to explain it more simply, is like a general rule would be like, all players go in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But a specific rule would be like, if this player is a rogue and has this, he always gets to go first, right? So the specific rule then breaks through and then supersedes the general rule and the general blanket rule. Now, again, a lot of these topics and things people just cannot even suffer to go through because they are now deemed, these are radical ideas, man. That's way too far out of bounds. And that's where I come in from the Christian nationalist standpoint. But again, I also point to the fact that Sean Strickland also is probably one of the worst people to be the leader of such, because he comes from such a secular standpoint. He comes from such a position of out of faith, and it's not even that a broken clock can be right twice a day, but even someone who's not seeing the light of day of Jesus Christ can still generally see right from wrong in a lot of instances, especially when it's so clear and opaque to the average person. And I think that's very well seen in the current iteration of social dynamics, which is two-income households. Look what he said, children's rating themselves. It's more so like children's being raised by iPads, right? They're being raised by Coco Melon. Like that's where they're getting their education from. And so it's being allowed and everything is being outsourced. And it's like this continual pattern of every single individual person abdicating responsibilities and duties for convenience for the most part, or rather just selfish happiness, and for whatever form that takes itself in. To move to a bit more of an actual news topic, less so political opinion piece here, I will actually put this on screen. This is a follow-up to the Varmagate story that we loosely covered on Jar Openers number 6, and this is that the Dr. J. Varma, who was the guy who was talking about how he was forcing people in their homes, but he was having, a bunch of these orgies and drug parties, knowing that he shouldn't have been doing it, right? Being caught undercover on camera by Steven Crowder, or at least one of the affiliates of Steven Crowder, I should say. So Justin, Steven Crowder, they have terminated, Sigatech has terminated Dr. J. Varma, the executive, immediately from his position as executive vice president and chief medical officer. Varma's position on SIGA's board of directors was also ended effective immediately. So it's good to see that he is, I guess, being canceled, I should say. But it's not even that someone's being canceled. It's more so that someone that is of that level of moral hazard should never and not at all ever be allowed anywhere near any position of authority when it relates to something on that high of a level, especially when it comes to medical sensibilities and safety standards too. Someone who can just openly say like, oh yeah, I lied to the public and we did all these things, even though we shouldn't. It's just like, okay, you're done. The unfortunate thing though, is it seems like, again, and this is the video that, he was caught on from, and to just once again iterate, he was the COVID czar, and they had secret drug-fueled sex parties during the global pandemic. Now, he even's open about the fact that regular people would be pissed off if they knew he was doing this, despite all of the laws that he was putting in place, or rather the mandates, disallowing a lot of regular behavior and activity. This is what we have to do, right? It is undercover journalism. That seems to be the way out of a lot of these situations, or at least being able to get specific individuals out when you have a lead. Now, if you watch this, you probably think that it was done by James O'Keefe. If you see it across the way that this is being done in form of a Tinder date, really, with whoever the journalist is, pretending that she's interested in this guy to get him talk. I even said this on Jar Openers, it's kind of wild to think that for some reason, these guys who do the most evil and heinous stuff against the American people, violating their constitutional rights, are their biggest kryptonite is and probably an attractive woman just being interested in them, and they're for some reason they're like, oh, let me brag to this lady about how I was a villain. I, I mean, and it kind of tracks though if you're following current dating trends, right? Like, if you were actually super nice to a lady, she'd be like, "Ooh, you're obsessed. Get away from me. I want the guy who's going to talk to me like trash." But again, not to beat up on women, but just an update to see that journalism is effective. Steven Crowder and what he does is effective, and so it's good. And so it's a good shout out to actually see something material being taken place for this. Now, again, it is only one individual in one city, but again, every piece is a sane or a piece of, or man, forgive me, it's a grain of sand in the heap, right? And so it's beginning to just pile up and continually to rack up your wins where you can get them. Now, to move on from this, we're going to keep covering some of these smaller things here. And again, forgive me because I'm not as nearly prepared as I normally am to cover a lot of this stuff. I wanted to bring this debate up, this interview, this podcast up, because I think for anyone, and I mean literally any single person, who does not have a strong grasp on what is occurring in the Middle East, between Israel, Palestine, the conspiracy theories related to such, the connections between Mossad, Jeffrey Epstein, the blackmailing rings, the child sexual trafficking blackmail rings, even slight connections here to what Diddy is going with the Diddy story, and what he's being charged with. You definitely need to spend the 4 hours listening to this. I will say, I think it's around the 2.5 hour mark is when they go specifically all about Israel. But I wanted to highlight this for a number of reasons. One, I thought that this guy was okay. I don't know who he is. This is Ian Carroll. This is the guy. I like this guy a lot. And even though I disagree with him on a bunch of things, because he is a Washington State liberal, it's someone who's gone through the data over and over again on different things. And this is someone who, being raised by two educators on the West Coast, is now coming to agree that he thinks Christianity needs a stronger hold in this country. So even somebody who's from the outside in looking in goes, yeah, man, I can see the importance of Christianity. What you'll see missing from here is Christianity. Now, this is Penny two times. That is who this individual is on the left-hand side. This individual, and the one thing I did want to point out with this interview, outside of it being a phenomenal source to listen to, and again, what you should look for is Penny2X on X or on Twitter, whichever one you would prefer more. His things has changed the world. He's got about 100,000 followers now. It's someone who's been growing quite a bit in the sphere of information. So this is my first time actually getting an understanding of who he is, but I will say he did exhibit the emotional immune response that many conservatives will if you actually begin to encroach upon the nature of our relationship with Israel and the allyship that is there. And to make an example of this, he actually does this multiple times. This man here goes on to say, well, like my I'm not Jewish, but my grandfather and my father and my grandfather was, I don't believe or anything. And then Ian will say something, and then he goes, oh, whoa, me being Jewish, like, it's kind of this weird kind of like snake tactic, if you will. And again, this is extremely uncomfortable for people to hear who aren't familiar with these things. So I'll make it an actual a priority to dive deeper into this and try to do my best to explain these things. Probably going to be pulling a lot from Ian Carroll as well, seeing how he's one of the leading researchers on these topics. But to put a pin in this podcast here, at one point, this individual on the left says that he would allow and he would bomb a stadium even if his own daughters were in there, if it meant that he was getting back at Hamas. So it just goes to show the level of, not escalation, but I will point once again, like the war that's in the Middle East is very different from the war that's in Ukraine and Russia, this is not a battle of attrition. This battle that takes place in the Middle East is a battle on eschatological grounds. Like, these people fight these things and will do these things to the death because they believe them to their core. So the different reasoning actually applies, there's different rationales. And that would then imply different solutions would then need to be enforced, or at least looked at to get us out of there. But just a side note there, though. I wanted to actually go to cover a bit of the Trump shooter number 2, which was the fact that there was a leaked bounty And again, another tangent off of what we were covering. I'll go to Matt Walsh's first. The Covenant Shooter Manifesto, which is from the Tennessee trans shooter, because they were afraid it would inspire more shootings. But it's unavailable because I'm assuming they deleted it. Was the fact that they did release a bounty, which was for Donald Trump's assassination. I believe it was around $150,000 is what it was being listed as. But this is what Matt Walsh says. He says they didn't release the Covenant Shooter Manifesto because they were allegedly afraid it would inspire more shootings. And yet, within a week, they released a letter from Trump's would-be assassin where he openly encourages more shootings and offers to pay for them. And now I did want to go to Tim Pool's reaction to this as well, in which he says this proves Trump was and is being targeted for assassination currently. Isn't the whole letter, and Ruth is still alive? Libs are trying to downplay the second attempt by saying nothing even happened. I think this benefits Trump. Now, one thing I will say about all of this too is, as far as I understand it, Matt Gaetz covered this rather loosely, and I've not seen much even going further to speak to this. But I do remember it, and so anyone correct me if I'm completely wrong on this. But Matt Gaetz pointed to the fact that there is actually a group, there's a known, I think it's 5 different individual groups, or entities rather, are known to us in intelligence here in the States that are working to actually actively assassinate Donald Trump. Now, this once again goes back to it's Iran. You know, and I don't believe there was any other further details released on that. So it could be, you know, a bunch of ideologues who are actually just completely indoctrinated from left-wing positions or liberal views or Antifa wings maybe. But it does beg the fact that everybody, and I mean all people, should actually be paying very close attention to what will take place in this, specifically in regards to just how damaging it may be on the posterity of the nation, right? Because what does that mean? Say one of these attempts is successful. I mean, I don't think anyone's even prepared for that level of chaos yet. Now, that's not to say like, oh, you're not going to be able to go to work because people are stealing food out of the kitchen. No, I'm just thinking, and I think that would cause civil strife on a level that I don't think America's seen before, at least not for quite some time. Probably not except for dating back to the Civil War itself, and even predating that, the Revolutionary War. It's one of those things that it's very terrifying to think of the prospect of. And now that we know that there's multiple groups trying to do this, we've now seen the second attempt, and this is just with gunfire. I believe I was listening to another individual podcast where they said that there's now actually been 7 attempts technically, and they include things like a letter was mailed that had some kind of like poison thing on it. There was some kind of other instance where a chemical was placed in a specific manner, and so I think on record it actually would be 7 total, but 2 obviously well-known high-profile events being or trying to be taken out with firearms. And so I think that actually kind of holds a higher stake into individuals' minds because it's much more, it fits closer to the iconic, you know, assassination attempt, which would be, you know, JFK. Forgive me. My voice is already dying, and I've been doing this for like an hour. So I apologize. I do want to cover a couple more of these other smaller instances here. And like I said earlier, I'm trying to catch back into the news cycle, so I'm not trying to be all over the place, but I just wanted to cover things that I did find important. And see, there's going to be some smaller stories here. This one is insane. This is from the libs of TikTok. A New Hampshire school issued trespass orders to moms and parents, because there was a dad involved in this, for wearing XX armbands. In protest, or rather what she's saying here is to support their daughters being forced to play soccer against a male. Also banned a dad from entering school grounds for the entire season for wearing an armband to support his daughter. Now this is a complete exhibition of tolerance tolerates, but intolerance tolerates nothing. And over a long enough period of time, the longer you tolerate this kind of behavior, the less ground you will have. And now we are at the position in which a father is no longer permitted to watch his daughter play soccer because on probably some grounds of him being hateful, because we've allowed these definitions to take hold and be seen as truth rather than contestable. And you see these pink armbands, and it's just by saying that there are two genders. They're like, yep, you're no longer allowed to watch your daughter play soccer. Now, a minor instance, right? But I think the reason why we're seeing a lot more of this is because it's so expansive. I guess rather it's ubiquitous at this point. There's not a place you could probably turn your head that has not been touched by this vile, reprehensible evil, which is this transgender ideology. I just continually, though, I see these things and it makes me wonder, at a certain point, man, there's got to be some kind of actual uppercut swing, in metaphor terms, obviously, to not put up with this stuff anymore. These petitions, when the school board is 95% lesbian and the other 5% is a gay man, you're never going to win. Like everything's already been infiltrated. Now, again, I say this because I speak back to the fact that this is what happens when you have entire generations of men just go, well, can't we just all get along? And maybe that's because they didn't truly believe. Maybe that's truly because they weren't convicted in what their beliefs should have been. For whatever reason, though, this is where we are. And these are the cards that you have. This is the deck we're playing with. And I'm not shocked anymore. I'm not, no ounce of this is like, whoa, what? They did that? Really? But every part of me is like, a protest doesn't do anything. It's not meaningful enough anymore. And this isn't to say like, whoa, we got to escalate. I'm more so saying until enough people actually decide that they are unwilling entirely to be completely intolerant of this evil, we're not going to go anywhere. There's no more like halfway position where it's like, well, as long as they don't mess with the kids, it's like, I don't care what adults do. You take this kind of weird gay libertarian position. It's meaningless, right? It's honestly entirely meaningless. And again, these stories kind of speak to me because I'm someone who is about to have a daughter, who I'm about to have to go to war with, who I'm about to be called worse than Adolf Hitler because of some of the positions I'm going to be taking or having to take in the near future. And so my options are this. Well, you can homeschool. Yeah. That's a great position. And you know what? And this is not to dump on homeschoolers. This is more so to say, because everyone ahead of me, everyone older than me, the generations before me, were so weak that they now have to point to some lesser than option because they let all these things get taken over. So now my daughter won't get to have the chance to go to high school and have that social experience that would actually be beneficial to her. I'm going to have to find ways to like kind of artificially replicate these social experiences with random other kids that I think is actually that's helpful to understanding the world around you. And it's like, well, here, like you can go in the corner still. Like there aren't trans people in the corner over there. Like you can hide, like just cover your face. It's just overall depressing, right? Isn't it? And so, you kind of sit there and I also, and I point to this too, because I also speak to this as well, which is, a lot of people go, well, the world's about over. Like, what are you going to do? This is an evil world. And it's like, dude, you realize in Genesis, God says, and then it was good. Like creation is good. The Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord God says, and then it was good. Creation is good. It is the people that are evil. And so to sit here and think like, hey, like, we should just abandon everything because, it seems like it's the end times. It feels like it's the end times. I'm sorry, that's just defeatist. I mean, then shouldn't your positioning be then to like, well, it'd be better off if you just went to church and just didn't go to school, because what's the point of having a job? The world's about to be over. It's like, but it's only when you go to the positioning of, so when do we fight back and try to reclaim these things? Oh no, the world's fallen. You just got to let it burn. And then you go like, okay, well, then I guess I should just quit my job and then go do this, right? Well, well, that's different. How? What's so don't fight. So don't fight on any meaningful grounds, right? But and again, a lot of these things, a lot of these topics go over people's heads. But from the way I see it, right, it's I don't have the arrogance to assume, and I will say it as that, because specifically it tells you in Revelation, I guess I think it's Revelation, you will not know the day nor the hour. And sure, I can sit here and be like, well, yeah, I mean, a lot of these things, like, it seems like it's getting really bad. I don't have the arrogance to say, yeah, man, the end is nigh. I can sit here and say, yeah, this trajectory looks really, really bad. But to just default to the end is nigh kind of puts you in a position of like, okay, well, it's been defeated. We just got to wait for God to appear. It's like, really, like you couldn't have like. And again, I'm saying this as someone who is going to have to raise a daughter in this world, and it seems like all of the Christians around me are just like, yeah, we lost. Okay, see you next week, Todd. Like, and I'm not, and I didn't mean to say Todd. I was meant to throw a random name in there because Todd's from Knights of Gideon. Forgive me, but it's more so to speak of, the fight's not over. It's never over. And I think more specifically that we're not Christian for the outcomes. We're Christians because it's the right thing to do. We're Christians because that's what we should be. We're Christians because that is the truth. So to sit there and then to say like, well, the reason I don't fight back on anything is because the outcome is almost here. No, dude. The reason why you should fight back against this stuff is because it's the right thing to do. It's because it's clearly evil. So now all of a sudden it's too much evil. Now it's like, well, I guess it's time, man. I just can't buy it, and I can't stand it, and I don't enjoy it, and I don't appreciate it. And I think it's very, very weak-willed. It's just the way. It's a nice excuse, a nice scapegoat to not push forward, not to fight. And you can do so by rather kind of aggregating scripture to be like, well, I mean, this encumbrance of things here, I guess we just can't fight. We win in the end, though. I mean, yeah, we do. Like, but to use all of that as a way to say, hey, we're not going to fight evil here on earth. We're not going to bear witness here on earth. We're going to hide in our corners until the time comes. It's like, I'm sorry, like I don't buy that. Even in my soul, I know that's not right. I know it ain't easy, but I definitely know it's not right. And that's where I come from that on there. Now, to move forward, though, I did have another kind of cool viral video that was related to Springfield. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But again, to stay on this degeneracy kind of aspect here, we'll go to this viral video that was on X here. Of course, it's going to be like this. This video must have been, of course, the video got deleted. Half of what I've tried to pull in here has been deleted. Well, okay, well, I guess I can explain it here. The video, rather, is very simple. This kid hasn't showered for 19 days. His mom tries to tell him on camera, and he's recording the whole thing. She says, you need to take a shower. And then the kid says, that's abusive. I hate you, Mom. Like, you're abusive. And this is the kind of level of letting kids rule themselves. We should let the kids decide, right? Following this kind of liberal kind of line of thinking when it comes to, the transgender, picking your gender kind of stuff. But it just shows weak leadership from parents in the home, especially probably one that seems to be a two-parent home. I would imagine in this case, it's probably a single mother home. And it's just, it's disturbing. And it's all these things could so be easily pulled back if righteous men put themselves in position to fight against it rather than hide in dark corners and then just say the same three Bible stories over and over again and pat themselves on the back when Sunday service is over. And like I said earlier, like I'm going to be taking the guardrails off here soon. because I got a real bone to pick with the way that things have been going. But that was just a little side story. And unfortunately, you can probably see here he looks pretty greasy just in that little still frame there. But it's just to give you like a nice video example of how this takes its form in a million different ways. Now, this is another one here from those of TikTok. Let me go ahead and get rid of some of these here so I don't burn my computer alive. But the story is wild from those of TikTok again, that a 90-year-old man in Turlock City, California, was reportedly attacked by 4 men over the Trump signs he was displaying on his property. The men allegedly threw rocks at the 90-year-old as they damaged his Trump signs. And so, this kind of gentlemanliness aspect of war and honor, when it comes to even civil disputes, is gone. I like to think that there was a day and age, however long it may have to be ago, where even the bad guy would look at a 90-year-old and he'd be like, I can't, I can't hit a 90-year-old. That's dishonorable. And so I think a lot of these kind of even smaller, more esoteric guidelines of principles have eroded away. Now we will take a listen to this to give you more information on what happened in the story here.
I'm 90 years old, and they take all my signs because I am.
So you can't hear it very well.
Trump, trying hard.
He just essentially said he's 90 years old, and he's talking about how he put the Trump signs up in the air. So they're clearly just taking a look around here. Forgive me, I thought this was actually the news piece. But I think the point stands even without having to play any more of this. This frail old man could probably be knocked to the ground by a probably a brash fart even. And so to think that 4 men jumped him and threw rocks at him is extremely disturbing. But it speaks to the ideological warfare that's happening when you see an American flag or a Trump flag. And that kind of on-site hatred that's been indoctrinated into these people, these leftist, leftoids. It's extremely damning. And to be honest, my heart goes out to this man because who knows how fast his life expectancy was just dropped just because of this singular incident. And so obviously just destroying his house. Just probably didn't even want to attack the house, but just scare and intimidate him. But again, I got to sit here and think, there's probably nothing you could probably honestly do in terms of throwing a rock at a 90-year-old man that's going to make him back down. You probably actually just hardened his heart in that direction, I would say. But I think of this in the same light of what happens when Trump, who seems to be the singular hope for what's going on, even though I don't agree or align with him 100%, I think there's a lot of bad portions about him. The level of chaos we would see if he were to be successfully taken out and eliminated by someone who was wanting to assassinate him, which would just be pure chaos, I think, on levels we've never seen before. And so again, I think it's just something to think about, something to be aware of. It's not like the end of the world, but rather the end of the country. And what would that look like? How would that take form? Extremely terrifying. Now, to make another note on a story that I covered just on X, I quoted it rather with the headline. So this tweet says, "That'll do, monkey. That'll do." And this is from the Publica. This is the news organization that was started by the Quartering and Sydney Watson, who is a former contributor of The Blaze. She was a host with Elijah Schaefer. I mean, you can't make this up, man. A troop of monkeys stopped a man from raping a 6-year-old girl in India. And of course, what other place would this be happening in? You can see this hilarious meme here, which is a chimpanzee looking at this Indian man saying the rapes must stop, Akshit. And this is the story here. It's pretty simple. The monkeys are being praised after saving a 6-year-old girl from being raped in India. The monkeys attacked the rapist after he pulled the child into an abandoned building, scaring him off and letting the girl leave unharmed. And one of the first things I will say is God moves in mysterious ways. You never, even if it's not in the form of a person. I even read a very similar story to this one about a guy who was camping. And, he kind of saw this light, and this light led him to find a flipped over vehicle out in the middle of the woods. And The only reason he even was up at that hour was because a bird came and smacked on his window, which led him to seeing out the window this light facing towards his house that shouldn't have been. And so honestly, glory to God for that one. That's amazing, using his creation to save a little girl like that. Now, and that's not to say like, oh, he came down single-handedly and did this. Maybe this event was always going to play out this way, as he would have set it out to be. I think the real point here is this is obviously going to drive up racial irritation on racial lines, which is one that's been a common theme, which is Indian men, the way Indian men carry themselves, the way that India is the single-handedly probably worst country to be in as a female, because your chance of being raped or assaulted shoots through the roof. I mean, I'm not even joking. And so this, again, I think I'm just going to tie this back to, on racial realism lines, which is there are very distinct differences between our cultures, whether it's white and Black American, whether it's Haitian, whether it's Indian, whether it's Asian, whether it's Russian. And there's a reason why we have borders. Now, the reason why that these things probably take place in India probably are a multitude of reasons that I'm not going to go to depth in. But it's to say, if we want to look towards legitimate reasons for why we should be opposing immigration on all levels, it would be because some cultures are genuinely just simply not fit to exist in the current civil order that exists in America. And that's regardless of criminal record, and this is more so to speak to the fact of there are clearly some very ingrained rule sets and evils of these individuals that, just because you cross over to the American border, you're like, wow, man, like, I'm not Indian anymore. It's like, it's just a joke. It's one of these things that just people kind of just, we're all one race. And it's like, no, we're not, like the Tower of Babel speaks to this, right? Anytime someone tries to come to you with this, we're all going to be all one race together, and we're all going to do like this kind of globalist perspective. They are literally repeating, rather rhyming, the rhetoric that was spoken by the men who were at the Tower of Babel, who were trying to pursue godhood themselves. Rather, they weren't explicit in that. They were more so implicit with that, but understanding that if we all continually do this work together on a utilitarian basis, we can build this tower high into the skies, and we can eventually, we can see God, we can be God, we can accomplish these great things. And so it's really to speak to the reasons why, there are borders, why nations do establish themselves as being sovereign. And again, another topic that makes people uncomfortable, even though any individual on the surface knows it, feels it, sees it, understands it. But when the moment something happens, you go, well, I can't say that. I might make someone mad online. It's like, dude, and it's like, come on, man. Like, you don't fear truth. You don't fear God. You fear what people might call you on the internet. And that is your God. Your God is the fear of what your self-perception may be. Now, a couple other things that I'm not going to put on screen here, but one of them would be the fact that there are going to be gang wars in Chicago. Venezuelan gangs obviously are in Aurora, Colorado. We covered that a little bit on a previous video, maybe a standalone video. But we're seemingly getting ready for gang wars to be taking place in Chicago between Chicago gangs and Venezuelan gangs. Again, it's this kind of insane thing to think that we're going to have to rely on Chicago gangbangers to help out the people and the civilians of Chicago. Now, for that reason, like, it's again, like, I point to the fact that policing as a whole, as a system, is entirely broke. It's filled with a lot of weak men who have no will, no conviction of their own. Many of them will tell you, I'm just following orders. And one of my biggest qualms with that is like, how could you become the actual fingertip of the enforcement arm of the executive branch, whether it's regional or whether it's federal, like in Border Patrol, and then be like, and I don't care about politics, man. Like, I mean, you're just a stormtrooper at that point, right? Like, you have no true understanding or conviction of what right is wrong is. You don't pay attention to the meaningful actions that would lead you to be taking these orders or doing these things. And rather, probably in Chicago, they're probably all on the north side, on the highway, getting people who are speeding, doing everything they can to actually avoid going into areas that do need enforcement, right? And it begs the question, like, why are cops not just standing on every block that's considered bad, right? Why don't you go, okay, on MLK Street and Franklin Street, this corner is really bad. Okay, well, instead of telling me that, like, why don't we position a cop to stay there for 12 hours a night, dude? Oh, that's a little dangerous, man, right? Don't you think? I don't even know what the excuses are. So now we're going to be waiting for Chicago gangs to fight Venezuelan gangs, and we're sitting here like watching the TV on the news, like, I hope the Chicago gangs win. It's so pathetic. It really is. But again, all of this is social degradation. All of this is broken nature. And this isn't even just about, moving away from Christian ethics. This is more so about when you outsource masculinity to a singular place or entity, and then to a body of people who are just, for the most part, entirely or rather unwilling to pay attention to politics or act on their own politics, you get the results of a 2020 COVID era where people are getting thrown out of their businesses being shut down, gym owners being fired and sued for trying to run a gym during the pandemic, and they don't care. I mean, they got boots on, right? A lot of people go point to the SS, right? Like, how would all these people do these nasty, evil things? And it's like, well, they probably just didn't care about politics. So when their boss told them to go do something, they're like, well, dude, I don't want to lose my money. It's unfortunate. It's being a slave to something and not knowing it. Now, one of these things that does have a video to it that I do want to actually go into is, again, on the same tangent of the just gayness of high school and the actual indoctrination of homosexuality, degeneracy, debauchery. Now, props to this girl. I believe she's a high school student. Not entirely sure how old she is, but I will put it on screen here. She's a student at, which you could see here, they deleted their account because they're no longer tagged. A high school in North Carolina, the student blasts the school board after she was made to read a book describing incest porn in class. And I will say props to this girl for standing up for what she believes in.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this chance to speak. So, my name is Lorena Benson. I'm in the 10th grade and I'm 15 years old. For 11 of those years, I lived in the Dominican Republic. 3 months ago, my family and I moved to North Carolina and have me enrolled in the highly rated Athens Drive Magnet High School. I was very excited for this opportunity. Until last Friday, that is, on Friday the 13th, my English honors class, my teacher assigned the class to read a story independently and then come together into groups and discuss the story and answer some questions. There was a part in this story that made me feel very uncomfortable, and I looked around and saw the same expression on other students' faces. We all had just read the following. It was not the summer you fell in love with your cousin Doozy, because that happened just a few summers before, when you both wiggled into the tiny space behind Grandma's garage, and you tried to fit what you both called his banana into what you both called your tomato, but neither of you was sure which was the right hole. Even after reading again, it makes me feel very uncomfortable. This graphic, ancestral sexual language should not be taught in any class, much less an honors English class. That day I came back home from school. As per usual, I told my parents about my day and the things I did. I showed them what I was taught in my English class, and they were as outraged as I was. This incident got me thinking. In my Healthful Living Honors class, I am being taught about brain functions and development. I was taught that the teenage brains, like mine, are not fully developed yet, and that we must be careful about what we engage during these years. Based on this logic, I am a teenager, my brain is not fully developed, and I should not have graphic, ancestral, sexual content taught to me in my classes. I am deeply bothered and deeply disappointed. I have decided to leave Athens Drive High School because I should not have to deal with pornographic, ancestral, sexual content taught to me in my classes. Thank you.
So huge props for this girl here. It also makes me think again, where's the father? Maybe he spoke at this event. I don't know. maybe the excuse is, well, every book has incest in it. I mean, come on, it's hard to avoid that. Like, there's no excuse for these things. It's a continual, constant push. It's a constant manipulation tactic. It's a constant, ever forward march of evil, encroaching on ground that we continually give up. Props to this girl for standing up for herself, and saying that to the school board. But, it makes me think again, too, to all these other instances where it seems to be only the moms are upset at these things. Now, there are plenty of times where fathers come out and say this stuff. But many of the recent ones I see are moms coming in and just being super angry about what's being done with the kids. And maybe that speaks to the fact that there are men who, for whatever reason, maybe are too engulfed in work and they just aren't fully wrapping their heads around what's going on in their school and their education with their children. And again, forgive me, I'm having trouble talking going this far. But again, I think that speaks to an abdication of responsibility. Your duty to ensure that your child is learning, is understanding, is growing in all aspects, not just is healthy, right? Like there's multiple forms of health, that's spiritual health, mental health, physical health. All those things need to be actively metered, measured, I guess I should say, and paid attention to. But I point to it because it's not stopping. How many years now have we sat here and seen the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? Like a school board this, school board that, school board shutting down people. They say, hey, you can't say that in this public room. And it's like, dude, you're teaching this to my daughter. And they go, yeah, but that's too explicit here. It's just this just dumb game we play, expecting that these people will ever change or be different. And that's not to deny the redeeming power of Jesus, but there also comes a time where a pragmatic approach of understanding with reason, that these people just like they need removed from their position. They need ousted. But what's to stop another one from coming in? And so as long as the indoctrination occurs on some kind of level that's not actively being defended against, whether it's outright banning of this material at a state level, let alone a national level, it's always going to exist somewhere. And again, that also is because it's ubiquitous in 110 different forms. This being a bit more one of the lighter cases, because I don't think it was included a picture or any kind of video with it, rather just in description alone. There have been many worse, a lot of them being, showing sexual positions in the teaching of such to even younger individuals than this. And to think that this 15-year-old girl is having to be the one to stand up against the elders of the school board, stand up against her teacher, rather. You can only imagine how uncomfortable that is for her. But the look on her face on the end of that video makes me believe that she knew that she was doing the right things. And so, just guys saying public schools are beyond saving. And that's where, and that's where you come to. And, that's as long as we operate with this, like, without taking actually like strong, meaningful action, right? And I bring up the example of like Oklahoma, who everybody, was saying like, there's no way you can ban porn. Like, there's no way that like they'll get these things done. And I believe Oklahoma's now banned abortion completely. I think they're criminalizing the attempts of such in different forms. I believe Oklahoma has now moved to a position of they're actually going to be, they have banned porn. I could be wrong on that, maybe a different state. So there's meaningful actions that can be taken. It's that the groundwork is not being done in many other areas to actually ensure that the culture moves that direction. And it is unfortunate. It's something to think about, though. Now, another thing is the fact that Trump is favored to win the popular vote. That's as of recent. That's from Leading Report. I'll go here just real quick. Kind of bouncing around all over the place now, but just wanted to bring this up from Quinnipiac University poll. He's favored to win the popular vote, which would be the first time a Republican would win since 2004. And that's just the popular vote. Remember, the one that matters is the Electoral College. Now, a couple other ones. I do want to go to a couple other videos. I have about 3 other stories I want to get to. I will say I'm extremely uncomfortable because the AC is broken in my house. I wish it wasn't this bad. I am sweating so bad. But let's go to the police chief of a town that's near Springfield, Ohio. And this is going to go to the Haitian story. One that I actually was unfortunately unable to cover because I was missing so much time. You know, of course, a crazy like close to home story happens when I take some time off. Now, this is a police chief of Tremont City, which is near Springfield, about a 2-minute clip. Now, this is him giving his opinion as the police chief of what is going on. Now, this is from Insurrection Barbie, a very popular, good account you should definitely be following on X. And they say that the sheriff, or this chief rather, tells you what is happening in Springfield. The cover-up going on here is quite literally insane. Again, how the heck is this happening in a Republican town? So I'll go ahead and play this. And again, any issue with sound, please let me know. I will adjust accordingly.
You've got a city that's in absolute turmoil. Everybody's against everybody.
Chad Duncan is the police chief of Tremont City, Ohio, which is just outside of Springfield. He described a general atmosphere of lawlessness in Springfield, which he says is spreading to the surrounding area.
People that shouldn't be driving are out there, and they're allowing them to drive.
Chief Duncan described one of his recent traffic stops involving a Haitian migrant.
He didn't even have a license, coming through town at 44 mile an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone. That's the second time in 2 weeks
And you towed his car?
Oh yeah, towed it for the second time.
And Springfield wouldn't have?
No.
He suggested that one reason Springfield authorities might be going soft on reckless driving is to protect the Haitians' immigration status.
If you get 2 misdemeanors, you are subject to be deported.
Since Springfield became a media sensation,
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Chief Duncan says his access to Springfield's police radio frequencies was cut off.
What exactly was going on with that?
Well, we were able to hear them on the radio. They have decided to go silent.
So just think about how ridiculous that is. Springfield has decided to go dark, or you know, 0 dark 30, right? To ensure, because they've probably picked up on the fact that neighboring cities and regions and residencies were beginning to make sense and understand the level and magnitude of what was going on. So to ensure that they have all their bases covered, they've went dark and are probably switching to very private channels to ensure that no other nearby township can understand what's going on, at least at the Springfield level. And although it may not concern these other townships directly, it would actually kind of help them to understand the level of what's going on, especially for a communications aspect, especially if they're in a close enough area that these people who are maybe doing criminal activities may come to this area or you know, lead into this area in some way. The other thing that I would like to point out too is the eating the cats and the dogs was not only turned into like a hilarious TikTok meme song that I've probably listened to a bunch of times because it's just catchy, but again, speaks to the fact of why you just don't openly open your borders and allow people of any kind of creed, culture, or background in, especially when they have literally not even just no willingness to assimilate, but rather no means to assimilate. When everything that's institutionalized is being put in a position to say, hey, you're trying to make them American, you're racist. Hey, trying to say that they shouldn't be grilling cats that are walking around with people's pets, hey, that's racist. And so it was a very rather quick change of, no, that's not happening, to, oh, it is happening and it's good. And this is why, you know, it's just, these are things that I didn't imagine would ever get to a level of such insanity that you could openly see these things posted on video on X. I mean, some things that like I'll remember for the rest of my life because they are just so graphic. I'm talking like one video of a dog on a spit roast, a pit bull. I'm literally talking someone's pit bull with the collar still on a pit roast being spun around a fire in someone's backyard. And you're racist if you call it out. You're racist if you say you don't want these things to happen. You're racist if you say these people should stop doing that. Or you're racist for just simply pointing out the fact that these are very, very, you know, non-civilized things to be doing. But that's more so to say that this is why a nation has borders. This is why there's an actual vetting process for people to immigrate here. But overall, the situation is extremely disturbing.
we don't know what's going on in the city. That happened the day they brought the state troopers in to help them out.
Why would you think they would make things hard to communicate?
Nobody can hear what you say, and they don't know what you're doing, so they'll have to answer to it. There was a threat at the school today. I couldn't hear it. I just caught wind of it from another guy, from another chief that's
Something.
right next to the city.
Right.
If they would have taken the time, instead of worrying about the elites lining their pockets, and just took the time, this could have went so much smoother and been so much more beneficial to everybody involved. But instead,
And so because that didn't happen, how do you think this ends?
I really don't know what.
Yeah, he's got no answer. How does it end, right? How does it end if the actual majority of people would rather line their pockets than do the right thing? And and so you can't, at a certain point, you're going to have to move away from the pacifist kind of stance, right? To just continually take it and tolerate it over and over and over again. And I make this category distinction between one of my friends through a text conversation we had. Forgive me, I'm not talking to the microphone. Where he's kind of talking in line of like, well, we don't do these things because of X, Y, and Z. And so I'm like, okay, so then what changes then when somebody breaks into your house, right? What changes then when somebody goes for your daughter in public? What changes then when somebody tries to violate your wife? What changes then, right? And so again, it goes back to a category failure distinction of, well, you can be like, well, yeah, but then now they're threatening this, they're threatening this life, or they're threatening this, and it's like, okay, so then why can we not apply once again this instead of this blanket idea, but then apply like, hey, these actions in the macrosphere are threatening all of these things that will have effects in the microsphere. At what point then do you decide to do something to change these things? At what point do you decide, hey, this is no longer, we can't do this? And I have to speak rather ambiguously because of how most of these channels and social media platforms will take these things. But I sit and think all the time, how selfish, how swarmy is it that we reap the benefits, and I think I've said this before, that we reap the benefits of the fight against tyranny that our founding fathers made, the sacrifices they made, the men like Benjamin Franklin's own son turning on him, becoming a loyalist, the split of the families. And then we are facing so much greater evils, so much more apparent and known in your face evils, and we choose to do nothing. Now, and there's a lot of famous kind of sayings here, but one of the famous opening seals, one of the initial seals that was actually proposed by the original founders, was I might be getting this entirely wrong, but I believe it was fighting tyranny or overthrowing tyranny is the command of God, right? It is the Christian command, or it's something along those lines, and I could be getting that wrong, but that's like the general kind of idea there. So if we can all say this, right? The police chief even kind of mentions it, knowing that everyone knows that it's like the elites, there's some kind of, vague group of people who are continually doing this then. And so you look at the founding fathers who did all this stuff that led to the Boston Massacre, which was a 2% tax on tea, with a single entity item of tea. Now, obviously other things were thrown in there with the taxation, with that representation. But you could argue very, very accurately so that what they were dealing with in those scales in that time is much, much less of a ubiquitous evil than what we're dealing with now. So then that begs the question of, how can we continually justify everything the founding fathers did, yet deny any action today? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to me. There's no point in pointing to a founding father if you're not going to then, like, there's no point in saying the founding fathers, what they did was good and we're thankful they have this country. Because if you think in this current time is that you still shouldn't do anything, well then wouldn't that be damning to what the founding fathers did? Wouldn't that mean that they should be damned for the choices that they made? It's kind of a thought experiment that I've been using here recently because I don't think I will get a good answer to it. Because again, I think this speaks to the actual sloth and apathy, the indifference, that the average American has taken. And it also speaks to the fact of, like, you know, they were a plurality of people, right? They weren't a majority and they weren't really a minority either. But it was around, 30%, right? It was like 30% were loyalists, 30% were revolutionaries, and 40% were the majority of people who said, just leave me alone. Again, just someone to think about there. Now, 2 other stories left before I go. I'm getting very, very uncomfortable because of how hot it is in here. This kind of shocked me a little bit today. Apparently, Marjorie Taylor Greene is being, the allegation, or is being accused rather, that she is insider trading. This is somebody who I've constantly pointed out to be a very, very extreme example of what a woman should not be, let alone, just not even in her own domestic life, but even how she presents and acts in the public. A lot of reasons, minor and major, for why women shouldn't be in these positions. But Laura Loomer is tweeting that Marjorie Taylor Greene, she says Trader Greene, is a liar and a con artist. She's engaged in insider trading in Congress and gaslights her constituents into thinking she isn't. She says, I have never seen a bigger liar in Congress than MTG. She says, I call her MTG because she has poop for brains and she's all talk, no action. Rooting for her to lose her election. Now, this is unusual. Wales, who's always been the one who's been pointing out Nancy Pelosi's trading, as well as a couple others who are very, very notorious for doing so. Just seeing that she made multiple large trades here for multiple different companies. So I guess if you're a stock trader, you should probably look into what MTG did to make a quick buck or two while this information is still publicly available. And you won't be the one that's charged for insider trading. You can just say, hey, I followed MTG. But I think this speaks to the uniparty kind of corruption that exists in the current day and age. It goes back to the very beginning of what I said, right? The battle's between good versus evil. It's not Republican versus Democrat. Evil and good exists on both sides. It's kind of like a yin and a yang. It's not nearly as black as white. It's like, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. There are good ideas and good, decent, some, I would say very, very rather and minor, if anything, inside the Democrats. It's like the yin and the yang, There's a little bit of white in the black and there's a little bit of black in the white. And that's what we see here. But once again, not surprised, not shocked. I just sit here and go, okay, wow, okay, what's next? Right? Like, I'm just waiting for the next one. Just show me someone else who's going to absolutely, abdicate all actual, responsibility and let alone fiduciary duty to her own constituents. I mean, this is a woman, we're talking about a woman who cheated on her husband with a polyamorous something or other, and then cheated on her husband like a week later with the manager of the gym that she went to. Yeah, you see like the light fading from my eyes. Like, yeah, okay, that's our leader, man. Like, it won't stop, man. Okay, this will be the final one I'll go to here before I sign off. But it's a long one and it's one well worth the time. And I think, and again, it goes back to Israel. I wanted to end on this, seeing how I started with a long, just kind of open thought to start this episode. Because I truly do find it to be the most significant thing that would enlighten any individual to understanding the current iteration of what's happening in the Middle East, the conspiracies of Jeffrey Epstein and Diddy, the sexual blackmailing, Pornhub, the degeneracy, all of it. And I mean all of it. People will say Israel derangement syndrome. All these people want to talk about is Israel. Yeah, good defense, man. Okay, this is from Noctis Draven, who is a very popular online YouTuber, I believe. I think I've seen a couple of his videos. But I will just kind of read through his what should I say? His monologue here, or rather just a little essay here. And it's nice to see you, Kukla. Nice to see you too. I'm sorry I've been gone for so long. And I apologize because I'll be signing off here in like 5 minutes. But this is Noctis Draven, and let's see if I have enough ability to talk here. He says, my friends, I know some of you are diehard Trump supporters, and I don't mean to directly offend you. I only implore you to look beyond love of a man and love of a political team to see reason and common sense. Number 1, AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, donates to both parties, all sides, ensuring that regardless of whom wins in Congress, Senate, and President, Israel will be a priority. This is well documented and not conspiracy. Number 2, AIPAC and other Israeli-friendly parties have donated hundreds of millions to Trump, Miriam Adelson being one of the bigger ones. Number 3, Trump has family, direct family, that are Jewish. Jewish people are passionately loyal to Israel despite being Americans and are very willing to use American lives in service of Israel. Number 4, Netanyahu and Israel support the removal of the Palestinian people and to establish a greater Israel. And they are very willing and currently carrying this out with deadly genocidal force. Of course, American media, both left and right, are deeply controlled by Jewish Israeli sympathetic supporters, so you do not see the thousands of videos and images of civilians and children killed. Number 5, the 2016 narrative against Trump was that Russia worked to get Trump elected. The current narrative is that Iran wants Trump dead. He goes on to say, common sense dictates that this is nonsense. Iran is a close ally of Russia, very close, both BRICS nations there. Why would Russia be friendly to Trump, but Russia's ally want to kill Trump? It is very easy to see that Trump may be compromised and knows that in order to have a chance to be elected, he must ensure war with Iran. Iran has been a target of Israel for many, many years. I believe Trump knows Iran is not responsible for the assassination attempts, but he also knows who runs American politics. Every war in the Middle East that Americans have been sent to fight and die in has been on the behalf of Israel. Please do not send more of our young lives to be spent so far from home and not in defense of America. It is okay to love Trump for who he used to be in 2016 and also recognize that for whatever reason, that same man does not exist. Now he has a load of hashtags here, and this is largely in response to specifically a tweet that Trump put out earlier today. I believe it today, right? The 24th of September, or yesterday, I guess it would be. Or last night, so super close, right? Almost before midnight. Big threats on my life by Iran. The entire U.S. military is watching and waiting. Moves were already made by Iran that didn't work out, but they will try again. Not a good situation for anyone. I'm surrounded by more men, guns, and weapons than I have ever seen before. Thank you to Congress for unanimously approving far more money to Secret Service. 0 no votes, strictly bipartisan. Nice to see Republicans and Democrats get together on something. An attack on a former president is a death wish for the attacker. I just want to point this out because I do have a strongly bad feeling that we are going to get conflict in the Middle East. And I say this because there are already 40,000, I believe it's 40,000. 40,000 troops are in the Middle East right now. We just sent another undisclosed amount over. We are now going to have 2 aircraft carriers in the Middle East. There's now, I believe, 2 Navy destroyers in the Middle East. A fuel tankard, which I think got caught up on its way over there, so it's going to be delayed by a little bit, and some other sea vessel as well. Especially when I deem what Israel just committed, which would be a 15-year-long meticulous attempt to commit a terrorist attack, which resulted in hundreds of innocent women and children dying. I fail to understand in the most commonsensical reasoning why we are sending American troops to continue this escalation, what American troops have to do over there, which would be anything beyond simply just aiding and abetting this, what I call a terrorist country, it's going to pull us into war, World War III, as clearly laid out by Noctis Draven. And if you haven't understood already from similar takes by me, Iran and Russia are in the same group alliance, which is called BRICS, which also includes China. Russia will definitely come and help Iran. What do we have to gain by this? Absolutely nothing. And I think if you follow the money, especially if you follow the trail with what you see with AIPAC and their nonstop multi-million contributions to ensuring that the pro-Zionist and whatever race wins, you will begin to make a lot more sense of why we have been in the Middle East for the past 30 years. It's reprehensible. I do not support Israel. I refuse to support Israel. And I hope that many other people can begin to see the light with these very, very openly and apparent actions that they take to continually push their psychopathic ideal of conquering all the territory around them as they see it to be their right. That is going to be where I end today. I appreciate everybody for being here for my return episode. I will try to be as consistent as possible with posting this. The next episode will be a lot more organized than what this one was. Again, I'm running on a lot less time, but I wanted to ensure I did get an episode out this week, and I had the most time today. Hopefully my AC comes back, God willing. But I will say, I hope the rest of you and everyone who joined here today and anyone who will watch this in the future has a good day. And Christ is King. Make sure you're doing your best to be in the Word. I know I fail to do that more often than I wish to be doing. But to ensure your heart, mind, and soul are all in the right place, to be confident in the things that you believe, it requires an actual encumbrance of workload, of actually studying the Word, and a willingness to be in the Word, and a willingness to hear what is being said, not what you wish is being said. So with that, everybody have a good rest of your night. I appreciate everybody for being here. And I will get a little bit better next time and go back to being as spot on as I was in the previous episode. But this has been offensively accurate, and hopefully this time I was a bit more offensive than I was accurate. Until next time, take care, everybody. Peace out.